What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Hanson Athletics Radio. So today we're going to be talking about injury, post-injury, how to start the recovery process, potentially get better faster and get back to sport or life as you know it. So one thing I can't believe I wanted to cover, just from my own experience, I've torn my Achilles and I have also torn my quadricep tendon, which are both a little bit more major injuries, right? And I want to kind of talk you through some of the advice I got as somebody coming back from that. Also, as somebody that coaches a lot of athletes daily, some of the I know advice that they're getting as well. And I wanted to cover some of potentially the issues with it or ways you can go about thinking differently as you're recovering from an injury. So one thing that is still I can't believe is still being given out as advice is to frequently and consistently ice the injury as well as stop movement. Okay. So post-surgery or just an injury, that's something that there's been a ton of research on. There's a ton of evidence pointing towards the idea that not moving and icing is actually going to slow down your recovery process. Yes, there are some perks to potentially pushing out inflammation if you're having an issue with inflammation, or even the way that athletes are able to deal with some pain. So that's a healthier way to deal with pain than some other options. But what you're going to be doing is actually slowing down the recovery process. So I wanted to talk about the fact that doing that to your tissue and following that advice is actually going to slow that process down. It's not going to speed it up, and could also not allow you to get back as quickly as you could. So one thing that we need to talk about is, and I've seen again and again, and it was important for me, is movement is key. So, if you've had an injury or if you've had a surgery, you need to get back in and start moving as soon as possible, finding ways around the surgery, around the injury, continuing to use the body as a whole, and allowing that recovery process to speed up, as well as minimizing any losses you have during that time. Because obviously when you have an injury, you're going to have some detraining effects. The more you can negate that, the better and the faster you're going to recover. So some things that confuse me about that as an evidence-based coach is, number one, I've worked with a ton of athletes and myself coming back from injury and made phenomenal progress, as well as got myself back from injuries a little quicker than what traditionally is supposed to be the norm, as well as just the evidence behind the research that's been put out, and the fact that the guy that came up with the rest ice compression elevate, he actually came out later and said that he was incorrect on that, and yet that's still a prevalent thing in the medical field, still a prevalent thing in advice that is given to people. So all of that super confusing to me. Some effective modalities that I've seen, A is getting the tissue to move, getting blood flow to the area. So that's going to be metal scraping, smashing tissue. So using a roller or a weighted object and getting the tissue to start moving around, pushing blood to that capillary bed or the capillaries, and allowing the healing to progress. Okay. Now, with that, you will see some inflammation and whatnot, but inflammation we just assume it's a bad thing. So don't immediately assume that inflammation is a bad thing, because that's not the case. That means that your body is working to heal, working to recover and get the necessary nutrients and everything in line in your body to start the healing process. So again, I want to swing back. Movement is key. So getting in, moving, starting to move the surgery site or the pain site as much as possible. You want to shoot for mostly pain-free. So as you're moving through movement, and if you're able to get to where it's pain-free, I would say you do that every day. Use that injury site every day as long as you stay pain-free, and then continue to build upon that day to day. So consistency on getting in and pushing it a little bit every day, as long as you can stay somewhat pain-free. And even if there is a little bit of pain throughout the movement, it's not 100% pain-free. That's a decision you have to make on your own, but there's definitely a little bit of threshold for it's okay to have a little bit of pain when moving through these ranges of motion, even if it's slightly painful. And as soon as you get through that and you're able to move pain-free, it's all about beginning to strengthen the area again. So beginning to do everything you can to build that back up, build back to strength, to use the body as a whole. That's going to be the fastest way for you to get back from injury and come back ready to compete and ready to get back in a normal life quicker and hopefully even stronger than you were before. So that's something to consider as you're going. If you have pain, if you have injury, I would definitely say from my own experience, staying away from movement, staying away from using the area is probably one of the things that's going to slow down your recovery process the most. As well as this is a whole nother podcast, but you could jump into the negative effects of that in terms of not having confidence in yourself as you come back from injury, not believing that you're able to complete the things you need to do, even if physically you are ready. So again, just to recap, move the tissue, get the tissue moving around, push blood to the area, keep the body moving together. If you need to in the beginning, it's super painful. Just find other ways to move your body, other body parts to train. For example, when I tore my Achilles, I would do as much movement as I could with my lower body by getting on an assault bike, doing stuff unilaterally on my good leg, as well as start working and scraping and smashing the tissue to push blood to it. And then as you get it through that and you're able to move it, start to strengthen. That's going to help you drive that faster and faster and get back to where you need to be to go back to sport and not have a mental block on your ability to do things. So hopefully that's beneficial. If you guys have any questions on that, let me know. Do your own research. Highly recommend you look into this. There's information everywhere on this. But look into it. Look into the Rice method. Look into how that's been debunked time and time again. Get back to movement, get back to pushing blood to the area, and you'll find, I think, that you will be happy with your results from that. It's been beneficial for me and my injuries as well as a lot of my athletes. So again, any questions, shoot them over. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Short one today. I want to bring you guys as much value as possible. If you have any other recommendations on topics you want to hear about, send them over. It's easy. You just shoot it over follow us on Hanson Athletics on Instagram or Coach D Hanson, my personal, and just shoot those questions over and we'll cover them and we'll do some research on them, talk about them, and make sure it's advice that can get you forward and help you out. So again, here's to building stronger humans, and thanks for tuning in.